Hey. Whether you are watching this on YouTube or BitChute, I just want to say thank you so very much for taking the time to listen to me. Today's video is Star Trek is Rotten. Now, much like a previous video, Jerk City is Rotten, a large amount of my research, almost all of it, came from an old article written on Rotten.com. Now, as I've previously stated, the website is down, but some fans have been reposting some of the old articles. So I'm going to throw a link in the description. Please check it out. It is a wonderful site. I can't sing its praises enough. But that is why the article from Rotten.com made me title this video, Star Trek is Rotten. In 1964, a dude named Gene Roddenberry produced just one, no, actually a lot, of failed TV pilots. But amongst that list of failures was a show he titled Star Trek. It failed. It failed hard. The network absolutely hated it, and their least favorite part was the guy with the pointed ears. Now, whether it's because Mr. Roddenberry was charming, whether they just wanted to be polite, or whether they were just that desperate for a show, they gave him the opportunity to retool everything. And this fateful decision set off a chain of consequences that is directly responsible for the fact that many of us older folks had cell phones that opened like clamshells instead of flipping out like switchblades. And they say television isn't important. Now, while the cell phone is a very visible effect that it had on our daily lives, it is just one of many. Because whether you love the show or hate it, or the franchise itself, it pervades Western civilization much like the Black Plague pervades the Dark Ages. Only fewer boils and more pimples. Mr. Roddenberry's dopey vision of utopia first hit the airwaves in 1966 with an absolutely garbage 1-hour premiere about a hairy sci-fi salt vampire. But in fairness, the vampire could turn into a really hot chick in a miniskirt. So that's cool. The not so great first episode. The show did actually generate some buzz. Now, while Roddenberry himself vacillated between adolescent egomaniac and inspired visionary, his storytelling skills were not so awesome. Now, fortunately, the debut of the high-profile science fiction show that had amazing special effects did attract some great minds. Some of the best in the genre, actually. Now, you had Frederick Pohl, Harlan Ellison. Now, these two helped craft some of the greatest science fiction on television. Tales of time travel, an alien mating ritual, and mind-bending parallel universes. And, to even things out, these groundbreaking epics of creative storytelling were interspersed with disasters about fascist female aliens stealing brains and heavy-handed Christian allegories. Because you have to let Roddenberry write some of the episodes, right? The series made Hollywood stars, maybe B-list, out of the two leads. The hammy William Shatner, great stage actor, especially Shakespearean. If you haven't seen him in Macbeth, you should. Game changer right there. And Mr. Leonard Nimoy, amazing director. His photography, not suitable for children. But he wrote a song about hobbits, and it was good. The rest of the cast, they all became celebrities of differing levels. George Takei's become quite popular in his older age. Very outspoken, very funny, very charming guy. But he is not Montgomery Scott, D-Day veteran. For you, sir. This show also fed a steady diet of catchphrases to a public that was starved for catchphrases. Even people who have never watched the show have uttered the phrase, "Beam me up, Scotty," and recognizes what warp speed is. Both of these came from Star Trek, the original series. But the most notable influence of the original Star Trek was the development of technology. You see, Star Trek debuted just before silicone chips came and just revolutionized technology of the world. And that is how they adapted new things, many of which they wanted to reflect the cool gizmos that were employed by the intrepid crew of the Starship Enterprise. Now, flip open communicators, obviously, is why cell phones flipped open. That's an obvious example. But everything from television to computers, and lesser extent, the show also set the bar for a number of things still in development. Virtual reality, voice-activated computers. Hell, research done by quantum physicists into teleportation, which was once thought scientifically impossible, was done so by fans who wanted to do what they saw on Star Trek. It also had a very, very strong role in normalizing things that were, in the 60s, not normal. Example, women and minorities, they weren't treated the best in the 60s. They weren't treated the best before that. And I'm not saying they're treated perfectly now, I'm just saying 60s and before, alright? Not going down that road. But on the Starship Enterprise, you had a black woman, an Asian man, and people of various nationalities, all working together and treated as equals. Mixed in with space alien Mr. Spock, gave it just enough sci-fi. People accepted it. Uhura, Nichelle Nichols, she wanted to quit the show. And her biggest reason was her character didn't really do anything. She was like a linguist, a communications officer. But she was talked out of it by Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr. He begged her to stay. He felt that the character's presence, even if she wasn't given a huge amount of lines and she was just treated like everyone else on the show, it was important because she was treated like everyone else on the show. This is a powerful message to people of that community. Whoopi Goldberg, who was a huge star, played a bartender on a Star Trek show because she was inspired by Uhura. And eventually, Nichols and Shatner got to take part in the very first interracial kiss ever shown on television. Now, it was a kiss that was forced on them by alien mind control. But that's how they slipped it by. Using the sci-fi part, you could take real social issues, and because you're throwing in a space alien, They go, oh, well, it's not real. And then the young people are watching interracial kisses and equality and amazing. Brilliant. I mean, they addressed social issues, race, gender, sexual mores. They even went over reproductive freedom in the 60s. So naturally, all this thoughtful, wonderful progressiveness, it baffled the executives. NBC was just... So, of course, you bounce the show around from time to time, you know, give them this slot, give them that slot. And then eventually, in the middle of the third season, just cancel it altogether. Right? And that's why none of you have ever heard of a television show called Star Trek. See, the show went into syndication, and it found new life. It became hugely popular. Much like Gilligan's Island, a show that was no longer making new episodes was killing it in the reruns. So in 1977, this movie called Star Wars came out. Now, you may not have heard of it now, but in 1977, it was very big. These execs, they're like, okay, Star Wars, super popular movie. Star Trek, popular TV show. By George, let's make a Star Trek movie. Har, 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 har. So in 1979, Star Wars got their first movie. Now, freed from the restrictive rules of network television, Star Trek the Motion Picture finally allowed Gene Roddenberry to fully realize the vision of what Star Trek was all about. No one can hold him back. So remember what I said about he's a visionary and a genius, but he can't write? Well, he wrote a 2-hour movie that had no charm, lots and lots of boring shit. But, popular show, people popped in to see what's going on with these characters that they love, generated some buzz. So, they greenlit a sequel. Now, it's going to be lower budget. And we're not going to let Roddenberry write it. But, yeah, we can try another sequel. The Wrath of Khan. It did alright. The franchise was reborn. So, many more sequels came, right? A recurring theme for the sequels was how old the cast was. That was to cash in on nostalgia and to gap the new generation that was growing to love Star Trek and the older generation. So, even though the cast was my age-ish, but there's an easy fix. Star Trek The Next Generation, all young and fresh. But people do age. So the best solution is, let's make the captain older than William Shatner is now. Yeah. Instead of having a 40-year-old complain about how old he is, let's cast a 50-year-old. Star Trek The Next Generation. Which I will commonly refer to as TNG. Much like the first Star Trek. They eventually figured out that he sucks at writing. So they brought in new blood, right? They kept Roddenberry around. They just let talented writers tweak and fix. And that actually elevated TNG to higher levels than the original. It was a better show. I'm sorry. Nostalgia aside, okay? So TNG had more intelligent stories. Better written stories. It wasn't nearly as campy, right? Now, its 7-year run was popular, which doesn't mean it's good, but it contributed elements to the cultural lexicon. Holodeck revolutionized and inspired virtual reality. The food processor, food animator, whatever. 3D printing. Now, the Borg. The Borg, for those that have no clue, they're a cybernetic monster race. They have the slogan, "Resistance is futile, you will be assimilated." They inspired Facebook and Google. So, the success of TNG led to spin-offs. Now, the first spin-off was a fucking great show. Not the most popular show. Maybe not even the best show, but the best written show. Deep Space Nine, or DS9. Complex stories, dealing with science, religion, and they hired amazing actors. Avery Brooks. Oh. Character development. Oh, man. So, the character development and the stories, a particular one about an assassination of an innocent Romulan senator. The greater good. Great show. It wasn't great for Star Trek. It was actually great for television of its own. Just like night follows day. Ratings, not as great as TNG. Now, it was a good show. It had solid ratings for most of its run. But, so Paramount, who owns the movie rights, anyways, Paramount launched its fledgling television network. So, what does Paramount have? Star Trek. That was the flagship show for Paramount's brand new channel. Now, by this point, Mr. Roddenberry had passed, and despite his bad writing, his visionary direction of the bigger picture, that's going to be valued with a new spinoff. Clearly. Yeah, he's a bad writer, but we're going to take his good qualities, right? No. Well, okay, so at least replace him with really good writers, right? And the writers are possibly worse than him? Ugh. Oh boy. So, in 1995, Star Trek Voyager debuted. Now, it lasted 7 seasons of flavorless gruel. But it had the title Star Trek and sinking ratings. Although they did have 7 of 9. Now, 7 of 9 was a Borg female with surprisingly large breasts and gorgeous. She was played by the actress Jeri Ryan. But, that being said, you still got the TNG movies going on while you're playing a Voyager on TV. Well, the TNG movies were being met with mixed reactions. We'll go with that. Voyager was great. Now, Roddenberry's heirs to the throne, a creative team of Rick Berman and Brannon Braga. No hate on them. They sat down and carefully calculated the decline of the franchise. That the problem was anything but them. We need a whole new screenwriter for the movies. Well, this dude won an Oscar, John Logan. He's gonna come in to handle the Next Generation movie, because we're just gonna end TNG and move on to possibly Voyager movies, or don't know, but we're gonna lead on to the next thing. That gave us Star Trek Nemesis. It performed so badly. You got a talented writer, a talented cast. They actually brought in a pretty good director. Like, on paper, everything's pretty cool, right? Well, you didn't aim it at the audience. You made a movie that the audience that would be attracted to a Star Trek movie wouldn't like. And the people that would like the movie aren't attracted to it because they don't like Star Trek. That's my humble opinion. Let's make a new TV show in the same direction as the worst damn movie you made. We needed a new Star Trek show, but we want to bring in the audience because Star Trek fans hate us and are pissed at us. Enterprise. See what's missing? They left out Star Trek. Oh. Okay. Well, clearly that just shows how new and exciting they are. Because everyone knows the reason why Star Trek fans weren't watching the Star Trek movies is because they don't like Star Trek. Other radical changes includes having a super attractive, large-breasted Vulcan female. See? Not a Borg. The actress playing the super hot Vulcan is Jolene Blalock. They also added a Rod Stewart pop song to further show that they're different from Star Trek, because Star Trek always had some pretty good theme songs, actually. So I will let you guess what happened. Star Trek fans hated it. But you brought in new audiences, right? Well, amazingly, the ratings sucked ass. So the show was canceled in 2005. Now, when your ratings aren't good enough to stay on the air for UPN, that's not just a loss. That's an insulting loss. So while I was editing, as the video went on and on, I was getting drunker and drunker, and my tangents were getting longer and longer, and my slurs were getting worse. By the end, it had devolved into little more than me hunched over and mumbling a lot. So, I figured I would reshoot the ending. Basically, without going into Discovery or the new spin-off, because they're still on the air. With the money to be made from merchandising and theme parks and conventions, they're never going to let Star Trek die. It will never go gently into that good night. Maybe, just maybe someday, Star Trek will be great again. Maybe.